Hi, my name's Stephanie. I'd like to welcome you all today to our webinar, 5 Keys to Simplified Asset and Configuration Management. A few notes today. First of all, if you've joined us before, you will see we are on the new platform today. So bear with me as I'm finding my way through the new controls. If you're having any problems, you'll see that there is a chat window at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Please send me a note there. Ideally, if you do broadcast all, that's probably the easiest way to do it, and that way you make sure I see it as well as our presenters. Also, your phone lines are muted today, so please use that chat window for any questions that you have for the presenters. And lastly, we are recording this event today, so you will receive a link to download the recording as well as all of Don's slides, and I hope to get that out to you by later tomorrow. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen Systems. Don?
Thank you, Stephanie. Hi, and thanks for joining us. I'm Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen, and with me is my partner in crime, Jeff Benedict, who heads up Evergreen's ITSM practice and leads our innovation efforts. If you're new to our series, thanks for joining us. If you're a past attendee, thanks for coming again. Our goal, as always, is to share valuable information and insights you can use in your planning and activities right now. The topic for today is 5 Keys to Simplified Asset and Configuration Management. So here's our agenda. After a very little bit about Evergreen, we'll dive into it. Beyond that, we'll briefly demonstrate some of the concepts we will discuss today as seen through the customer's eyes in our always evolving view of an advanced self-service catalog and portal experience, which is built on ServiceNow. Then we'll answer any questions if you have any. Evergreen is a U.S.-based consulting firm. We've worked with hundreds of mid-market, Fortune 1000, and public sector organizations to improve their IT service management execution. Over the past 18 years, we've delivered more than 4,000 ITSM projects. We are full life cycle, meaning we have both process and technology in the same firm, which we think makes it a little bit easier for our customers to focus on their business problem at hand. We are one of only 2 top-tier U.S. ServiceNow partners in what is now designated gold, now that Fruition is CSC Global and Cloud Sherpas is Accenture. And we have well over a decade of domain experience in every area of the ServiceNow portfolio. But we do view all of this from something we call customer-centric service management. We really took notice of the beautiful self-service experiences we were having as consumers with Amazon and Google and Apple and Zappos and Airbnb and things like that. We wondered, why can't our customers have the same thing? So we started challenging our core thinking around ITSM, and as a result, we started looking at everything we did from the customer in rather than IT out. We call that customer-centric IT service management. In some ways, it was embarrassingly obvious. If we weren't delivering IT service management for the customers, then who were we doing it for? If we start with the customer, we actually do things differently. We focus on preventing incidents rather than just handling them. We use self-service and automation across ITSM to make customers happier and reduce the work of IT. We see services as end-to-end team value chains rather than disconnected silos. And this better understanding leads naturally to better and smaller changes, which have less change failures, because we know better. And as far as knowledge, it becomes a powerful, beautiful, self-enabling experience where we can change the value of technology that our employees get. Here's something that is new for us this year. For many years, our customers have asked us for a pre-built ITIL best practices solution they could just use, so we finally built it. Our Evergreen Ready platform includes pre-built incident, change, problem knowledge, and a 1-year license for our self-service catalog and portal. It can be operational, since it's already done, in 2 to 3 weeks. And it's not just technology, but it is complete as-built policy, process, and technology, including the RACI charts, the workflows, the roles and responsibilities, so you can actually run it successfully. It has over 750 best practice improvements to ServiceNow out of the box. So if you're new to ServiceNow, or if you're considering a re-implementation because you're many generations back and you want to truly use true, complete best practices out of the box, Ready might be for you. Best of all, it's affordably priced in the mid-50s. So let's get started on our topic. As we often do, there are a few idle definitions that are good for getting us all on the same page. There are 4 that are relevant today. Asset and configuration can get confused. It's hard to keep them apart at times, and it can seem to have a lot of overlap. I think the key to keeping this more clear is in the definition where it says tracking and reporting the value and ownership of assets. Thinking value and ownership can make us think more financially and control-oriented and leads naturally to thinking about contractual or third-party vendor kind of supporting relationships. So that tracking, reporting value is a really good way to keep asset kind of clear in our heads. A configuration item is something that is needed to deliver an IT service. And a CI is a managed component. It can be hardware, software, process, or even a person. So when we think CI, we think more about readiness, current state, availability. In other words, is the CI ready to do its job when there is a request for a service? Configuration management is a process that maintains the accurate information about the CIs that we're delivering IT services against, and the CMDB is a place where we store that data. Last, Service Asset and Configuration Management, or SACM, ties it all together. It's the combination of asset data and configuration data, right? That ensures accurate and reliable information about an asset is available when it needs to support a service, including its configuration and relationships to other assets. So it's the place where all that stuff joins. Our first key is to look within and truly understand why what we have done hasn't worked before now. So why has asset management failed to deliver its promised value? Right off the bat, it's hard to get the data across the enterprise. Challenging access, different tools, different collection methods, and different repositories tend to make up what we call enterprise asset data collection. It's a patchwork quilt for most of us. So it's not surprising that we have redundant and conflicting stores of data that we need to rationalize and problems with consistent naming conventions and incomplete and fragmented discovery information which needs to be normalized, and then compared to license entitlement, which may have its own complex sort of rationalization process to get to license equivalents or license entitlements. So that can all be pretty hard. Then for the same reasons above, it is difficult to gather, rationalize, and align contract and vendor information, which is non-discoverable, by the way, with the asset data. Last, well, did we do this top-down? Did we clearly understand who would use the data and why, the key use cases, which would give us customer-centered perspective on what we were collecting and organizing? In most cases, asset management has been done bottom-up, collecting a massive amount of confused and conflicting data, and then failing under the weight of complexity and lack of purpose. Now, a lot of the points we'll make about asset and config really are the same. There are some differences, but you'll also see a great deal of commonality. So why has config not delivered value? The reasons are important if we don't want to make the same mistakes again, obviously. The biggest reason by far is that for configuration management, it was a solution in search of a problem. As we often see in IT, we're really good at doing things. We tackle big, complex things and wrestle them to the ground in a large-scale way. But again, we aren't that great at asking why or how will this be used. Does that make sense? And what's the least we can do rather than the most? So even though ITIL defined configuration management in the CMDB and CIs, there weren't really any best practices for how to succeed with it. So we were on our own. The amount of detail we began to capture was massive, and we got lost in it. Then as we brought others into the effort, since we didn't know why we were collecting the data, we lacked purpose we could share with others to help us all do the same thing. It's also fair to say that there was plenty of devil in the detail. Data sources were all over the map, inconsistent, inaccurate, duplicative, contradictory. We know that. That makes it tough. The Big Bang approach to collecting and storing all the data doesn't help. And last, I think it's fair to say that a manually maintained configuration management database at other than very high, most simple levels are not really very sustainable, and they can shift pretty frequently in a virtualized or cloud kind of future. So without really good application discovery technology, it's pretty hard to do well. So our second key is know why you were doing this. This is where we look at the benefits. What are the values that asset management can bring? Remember, we're looking on the value and ownership of the asset management side. From a planning perspective, we can use ITAM history to decide or to make decisions on asset classes for purchase, such as hardware from one vendor versus another vendor. It can also be helpful in project and portfolio planning. Let's say we're considering a major application upgrade with $1 million price tag, but by looking into the asset data, we find a significant hardware upgrade is going to be required, making it a $4 million project. Well, that's a very big difference in PPM. Portfolio simplification is maybe the greatest overlooked benefit or opportunity in asset management. Let's say we're supporting 20 or 30 different applications in a given area, wouldn't be unusual, right? Where 2 or 3 would meet 80% of the need. The cost and complexity of supporting all these apps is usually many times the software cost. It's quite phenomenal. Knowing this can really help simplify. Beyond that, we have the usual cost savings and compliance kinds of areas we see. But let's look at this last point. I just want to earmark it for the moment. Cost leverage. Having cost as a weapon, can we proactively influence user choice? We'll get back to this later. Innovative IT organizations are truly beginning to understand their value is delivering what the customer needs and wants in a high-quality experience. But they don't actually have to provide the solution because the customer doesn't care about that. They just have to make it available for quality consumption. This is in turn leading IT to focus on true services rather than technical outcomes, which is fueling the emergence of the role of the service manager, which goes hand in hand with IT as a service broker. Someone who owns the outcome the customer really wants end to end is the service manager. So what does this mean for configuration management? This change in role is very significant. As you can see on the right-hand side versus the left, there is quite a bit of difference between the role of the technical manager and the role of a service manager. This slide is a bit of a simplification, but it is not incorrect. You can see that as a service manager, you have many more questions you need answers to deliver your service. These questions arise when we see the service from the customer's eyes. Notice the bold blue items. These are questions the service manager has where accurate configuration management data can help them. And it's 75% of the questions on this right-hand side. Oop, went too far. The differences now make configuration management critical. Here are 5 foundational elements only configuration management can bring. Modular and reusable, end-to-end, true cost of service, KPIs the customer cares about, and top-to-bottom visibility. Configuration management is the decision-making support base underpinning all of IT's activities. So, our third key. We're going on a journey from start to finish. And for most of us, we haven't really done this before, end to end, completely. We will have lessons to learn, policy, process, and technology design and build, and it will be at least twice as hard and take twice as long as we think it will. When that is the case, it's best to choose something very important, even strategic, because when the going gets tough, which it will, we won't abandon it. Along with that, we want to start with something small, a manageable universe of data points we can understand and manipulate with manual intervention when need be, because that can happen. For asset, this might be focusing on 2 or 3 top software license titles or a class of high-value servers. For configuration, perhaps we focus on 1 or 2 high-value Tier 1 type of services, only ones that really matter. Whether for asset or configuration, this approach works. Pilot, learn, and apply. First, intend to complete the circle, the full life cycle from start to finish for the customer, provider, and manager. Until you do it, you won't understand it, you won't know it. Next, think top down. Very clearly, why are you doing this? So you can limit what you need to the absolute minimum and then go get only that. Everything is a service or a subservice, so as you map your processes and roles, think modular and reusable. 3 or 4 reusable modular processes in a given area can usually meet 80% of the needs. We talked about limiting the data. Along with that, though, we need to put in place our initial data curation closed-loop process. That will be unique to us, and it will improve the quality of our data over time. Last, we want to use this opportunity every place we go here to begin collecting cost data elements at every step and sub-process along the way. So let's consider this in light of delivering a service, just for fun. Every service we deliver is made up of lots of little services, and even though one person owns the big service, there are lots of little services being combined from different parts of IT to make it all up. So how does SACM help this service owner? It provides the details of the assets in each subservice. So that owner has meaningful data on capacity, availability, time to provision, quality of service, service issue resolution, and service outage restoration that allow him or her to see the service end to end, fix it when it's broken, and continually improve it for their customer. As a service manager, I get requests from new potential customers to be consumers of my service, whatever it is. These may be end customers, or maybe they're another provider who will use my service as a sub-service in their delivery. When I accept this request, the new customer is added to my active customers in configuration management, so I know at all times who is consuming my service. As a service manager, I can also see other services by other providers in configuration management. Let's say I find one that will add value to my service. I can request access as a customer to this service I found, which becomes a sub-service or supporting service to me and my service. At the same time, that sub-service provider has a new customer, me. A lot of what we did traditionally in configuration and asset management was below the double line that you see here drawn in the middle. The hardware and software technology components and their relationships to each other. For our purposes today, I'm calling this the discovered infrastructure. Above the line are the services. The service usually consists of people, processes, descriptions, functionality, options, and service commitments, as well as technology underpinnings. Most of what makes up a service CI can't be discovered. But that may not be a huge problem because the service isn't as hard to track as moving technology like a virtualized server. But just like we just covered, you can see in this picture that each orange service above is consumed by some customer. That customer may be another service or could be in customer, doesn't matter. And it's easy to track as a service owner and add and delete consumers of your service as they come up, as well as adding and tracking the sub-services you consume to deliver your service, as we just covered in the last slide. So it makes it pretty easy. You've pre-discovered your service map in the CMDB by following the process. The cool part about it is it's always accurate. From the example above, the dotted lines going down on the left and on the right side show our service visibility from top to bottom. Most IT organizations are at a very low maturity level when it comes to IT costing. This prevents IT from driving customer choice or participating in the fundamental conversation of business, which is cost-benefit trade-offs. As we move to IT services, organizations are beginning to see this as mandatory rather than nice to have. Whether we actually get cost reimbursement or just do showback costing, it still affects consumer behavior, creating better customer understanding and decision making. Just as importantly, it allows us to lead the customer where we want them to go by creating standard, bundled, Happy Meal kinds of offerings around the 3 to 5 activities we do most of the time. And using 2 powerful consumer levers we have at our hands, cost and delivery time. In this way, we can simplify the customer's decision making, lead them where we want them to go, and reduce the work of IT by automating those outcomes on the backside. Asset and configuration data, this can't be done without it. Our 5th and final key is aligning metrics from the top to the bottom. Again, we start with the customer, whomever will be using our data. Customer KPIs cascade down in a pyramid from the customer to the service manager to the service providers. Then the KPIs become SLAs, SLAs become OLEs as we go down, and then all that stuff rolls up to deliver the KPIs. Working as a team, we continuously seek to improve our service delivery as well as the measures of our success, which are greatly helped with visible alignment to the customer. With SACM, enabling modular, reusable sub-services, we could even trial build a prospective service, a service we might want to offer, and we could look at what the performance and delivery might look like end-to-end by adding up sub-service SLAs and OLAs around delivery times, performance times, that kind of thing, and even cost. Pretty interesting, huh? Prototyping services in a virtual experience. So in summary, data problems will take the life out of your learning efforts in asset and configuration, so be careful and limit them. Start with the end in mind, with the intent to complete the circle. Be proactive in designing a clear process to improve your data and commit to it and stick with it. Manage from the customer down rather than the provider up. That's all we've got today for our presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and he can demonstrate some of the concepts we talked about.
Wonderful. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Stephanie. So hopefully everyone can see my screen okay. So I'm going to start kind of where I oftentimes start. I'm going to start this is our self-service portal. This is ServiceNow. This is built on the content management system of ServiceNow. And some of the purpose behind the portal, this is where we would go, or users would go to consume information about the services we provide. They would submit service requests as well as track the status of the request. I also like to highlight this is also a vehicle where we can push and broadcast alerts, announcements, and kind of lead and prescribe solutions for our consumers. So I'm going to kind of start the demo today kind of going down kind of the asset management track in really kind of where it starts in some regards is kind of with demand and requesting goods or resources from IT. And so as a consumer, they can come out and they can shop for various services. Right? So if I'm looking for a specific service, I can shop through my different catalog or categories. And maybe I'm looking for a specific resource. So maybe I'm looking for, say, a new tablet that I can use to take notes during my meetings. And so one of the things, so in this case requesting this particular iPad, one of the things that's happening with this particular request is this one is not just provided kind of free to me as a consumer, but rather is handled through some sort of chargeback kind of mechanism. And so I can kind of choose different cost centers that I can spread this to in order to account for kind of using this particular piece of equipment or getting this piece of equipment. So I'm going to spread this across a couple of cost centers, and I'm just going to make it a kind of 40-60 kind of split. And when I go to add this to my cart, one of the things that's happening here is it's actually reaching out to our financial system to validate the information that I put in here. And this kind of covers one of the principles that we oftentimes talk about in terms of what we call good balanced design, where we're making it easy for the consumer to get the needs they need, the business needs they need through an easy experience, but also at the same time providing our providers and management the information they need in terms of charging back and accounting for the equipment and costs. All right, so I can proceed to checkout. I could add multiple items to my cart before ordering this, but in this case this is all I need. So I'm going to need a new iPad for meetings. All right, so I'll place my order. And I get a little notice at the top here, kind of a receipt, and as my request progresses to different stages, I'll also see other alerts or notices to me kind of through this avenue as well as through emails, other notifications. I can also come back to the status page to track the progression of this request. I can get some expectation setting as to when I can actually expect to get this, which is just a couple of days from now. I should be able to get this new iPad and start using it. If I'm curious about further details about how it's progressing, I can go to track details to kind of see where it's at within its life cycle, much like I could track a package if I were delivering it through FedEx or UPS. First thing I see is it's in a review and approval state from our CSA review group. And I'm going to go over now to a session where this is one of those members of that review and approval group. And on their own portal, they have an option here for My Approvals, where they can go to see those items that are awaiting their approval. And here's the new iPad that was just ordered kind of through my other session. I thought I can see the various details of this. I could deny it, but I am going to go ahead and approve this to move it kind of to the next kind of step of the process. Now that that's approved, let me kind of shift gears a little bit and kind of show where this goes afterwards and kind of where it introduces or gets kind of introduced to our asset management tracking side of it. So in ServiceNow, there is an application kind of behind this request called our procurement application. Here is our new request that came through. And one of the first kind of activities of this request is there's a task sent to our procurement group to determine how we're going to source this particular piece of equipment. And really the choices typically are I'm going to either source this from an existing stockroom or I'm going to go through a purchasing request through a vendor to get the new equipment. So I'm going to go and click kind of source request. I'm going to choose kind of where we want this equipment to kind of stage. So we're going to stage it into our Southern California warehouse. And I don't have any stock or inventory from the stockroom, so I'm just going to actually create a purchase order with one of my vendors, and I'm going to order this directly from Apple rather than a reseller. And so once I've done that, my procurement task is basically done. I go back up to my request. One of the things that it did is it created this purchase order record now. And if I had ordered multiple things in my request, and they could either be consolidated into this one purchase order if they're all with the same vendor, or if I had ordered multiple things from different vendors, I'd have different purchase orders for each of those different vendors to get the different goods and equipment. Now, this purchase order record in ServiceNow, you could work this end-to-end where you go through the stages of ordering it with the vendor, receiving the good, then asset tagging the equipment, and ultimately delivering it to the individual. But this is where we oftentimes see our customers kind of have an interface with their financial system, maybe a system like SAP or PeopleSoft, to where they would go through some financial approval, handle the ordering with the vendor with that system, as well as the initial receiving through the financial system to kind of trigger payment to that particular vendor. So to kind of simulate that or to demonstrate that kind of process, I'm going to hit Submit for Approval. And this, again, is reaching out to our other system, kind of creating, and our other system in this case is an SAP environment, creating an SAP cart for that request or a requisition and purchase order for that. So this is our kind of matching record within our financial system for this purchase order. And so now it's in kind of a SAP approval stage. And then once it's approved, SAP would come back into ServiceNow and kind of mark it as basically move it to an order status. And what we've done is we kind of have an inbound REST web service, which basically takes that SAP number and a state to transition it to. So when I do this, my message is it was successfully updated. So now if I come back over here and refresh my form, I'll see it's now in an ordered status. So that's basically our other system coming in and moving it to the next stage. And it would do it one more time. It would also move it to a received status once the actual equipment is received, and we can issue payment back to, in this case, Apple for that particular new good. All right, so now kind of our purchase, our equipment is actually on a dock, or is basically being brought into our warehouse. And so now the next step is on this process. This is where ServiceNow would then take over and actually do a receiving and asset tagging of that new equipment. Right, so in this case, it's just one iPad, but I could have, if I had multiple quantities in this order, I'd have multiple things to asset tag at this stage. But I'm going to basically give this an asset tag of just today's date, and a serial number of today's date. And once it's received, this actual purchase order record is done. I now have a new asset record that I'm tracking. It's currently in our stockroom, reserved for the requester that requested this. And our request is not completely done because there's still the remaining steps to get this in the hands of our kind of requester. And that is done here. So there is a couple of tasks. You'll see one task out here for configure hardware and test before delivering, but this is by our field services group. They have a task here to kind of make sure that equipment is ready for use. They complete that task, and then they finally have another task here to deliver it to the customer. So once that is all done, now our overall request is complete. So look at our page here, you'll see all of our steps are done through all of our stages to source that request or source that equipment, as well as configure and deliver it back to the customer. Right, now from the customer's perspective, just to kind of close the loop on this purchasing request, they now, if they went to their kind of settings area, there's a My Assets screen out here. So I can actually now see here's our new iPad that Alice has that's now part and registered to her as an asset in our repository. So that's a fairly involved kind of workflow and steps, but I hope you can appreciate kind of some of the ease of the process from both the consumer perspective as well as the kind of tracking and accounting benefits that are gained from us as a provider. All right, so let me shift gears to a different area here. So another common way to kind of support demand needs, and specifically demand for kind of commonly ordered goods and services, is to use kind of a stockroom and kind of these stock rules. And what these stock rules are, these are, say for example, in the case of an iPad, what we can do is we can say kind of monitor our stockroom and make sure that if it drops below a certain threshold or quantity level, let's go ahead and generate, in this case, a purchase with our vendor and order in blocks of 50 quantity to replenish our stock. There's an option here to kind of check our current counts and see where we're at. The other option we can do with these stockrooms is actually manage stock between different stockrooms, so you could have a master stockroom as well as some satellite distribution centers or other locations that you would then transfer stock from one stockroom to the next. So that'll kind of keep on hand the common equipment that you might need to deliver to your consumers. So another kind of topic I want to hit on from an asset management perspective, is ideally you want to manage this kind of entry process of new assets and configuration items kind of through a standard workflow, kind of like I showed, right? And then ultimately manage kind of the updates of your configuration items through change control. But with many of our customers that I've worked with, this doesn't always complete the story. Usually there's data that needs to come in from various systems, various places. You might have, like in this diagram here, you might have data coming from ServiceNow's Discovery. You might have data being loaded from spreadsheets. You might have data that integrated from SCCM. And one of the tools that is kind of in our toolkit in ServiceNow is this identification and reconciliation kind of engine. And I'll just give you a quick look at what this, or show what this looks like. And so this is one of the rules that's in ServiceNow to support, in this case, the loading of hardware configuration items or hardware assets and configuration items. And the way this works is that you can define, and it'll go down the line of priority, is it'll use these as a way to match existing configuration items, and if it finds a match, it'll then update it versus inserting new. And so this is with the intent of making sure we don't create a bunch of duplicates for the same configuration items, making sure we can reconcile and update the appropriate items with the appropriate information. And the one thing I want to highlight with this is that these are configurable, so I can turn on and off rules that aren't applicable to me, or if there's specific naming conventions or specific attributes that I use in my organization, I can come in here and extend this rules table to drive a better reconciliation and identification process to ultimately kind of get good, accurate data into my system. So let's go to another concept here. So, obviously if all of these processes are followed and my integrations are sound, I should have an accurate and reliable kind of configuration management database, right? And the answer is maybe. So another tool that's in our toolkit in ServiceNow this is our data certification and kind of data certification plugin application. And really this kind of fits into kind of an audit and certification phase of your CMDB. And this is helpful for specifically certifying some of those attributes that Don hit on that might be more of your service-related attributes that they're not manual, they're not auto-discoverable, but are more manually maintained. So this might be your support group, your cost center, your service owner, or other kind of manually maintained attributes. And so just to kind of highlight what these records do for you is, first of all, they have a schedule in which they can run. This one's set for on demand, but I could run this every month, or I could run this every quarter, or every third Thursday of the month, and have kind of an ongoing scheduled activity. The other aspect of this is kind of honing into our configuration database to look at what is the data that I want to certify and look at. And in this case, it's looking specifically at database records that are classified as Oracle database records. And then some of the other things you'll see here is attributes to display to the person doing the data certification activity, just so they can better see what it is they're looking at to certify. And the certification fields are those things that we want that individual or group to actually sign off on and say this is indeed accurate, or there is something wrong with this particular data. And then my choices as far as assignment goes, I can use data of the configuration repository, so I could route this to the service owner that's on file, or I could route this to a specific support group that is related to that configuration item group, or in this case, we're routing this to a specific group, the database group, to certify this data, and giving them 90 days to kind of complete that activity. The way it works is I can kind of do an execute now. And it'll create, in this case, a certification instance. And in this case, there's only one task, but if I had multiple different assignment groups or individuals to route the certification task to, I'd have multiple tasks for each one of those kind of individuals to perform their certification activity. In this case, we're routing all of our work to the one database group. So there's just one task. And so what they see here is these are all of our databases in our instance. This is the data we're displaying. And here's the data we want them to certify. So this is my OS version, or my database version specifically, that I'm looking for them to certify. I could mark some of these as incorrect, make the edits, or I can go in here and say all is good and kind of mark it as completed. So it's basically an activity to queue up and verify that data is correct. If there are discrepancies, then it'll queue up activities to rectify that data. Now if I reload this form, you'll see this is complete. My overall certification instance is also complete, and that kind of completes that whole kind of chain of doing that data certification activity. So, and obviously one of the things that Don hit on was having an accurate CMDB is really kind of a game changer in terms of being able to provide better service. And one of those examples is if we start to look at something like a change management, if I'm trying to make a change to an infrastructure component, I may not be aware of the various impact it may have on the service that we provide to our consumers. And so to kind of highlight that, let me go through this process here, and I'll create a new change. So let's say I'm creating a change for a particular server. I'm going to make a kind of OS patch to this change to say latest version, say for security reasons. I'm going to make an OS patch to this server. I'm going to route this to my kind of system admin group. And I want to plan for this change to occur. I'm going to plan for this Friday I'll do Friday night, and then I'll kind of wrap this over into, oops, I'll copy that properly, into kind of Monday morning. So I'll just make a 2-hour window here. I'll save this. Now the first thing I want to highlight on this kind of change I've created is that I created it for this one server, but it's also showing me that it's got impact to 3 different services as well, our Workday, our Identity Management, and Salesforce.com service. And where it got this was through these relationship tree. So here's our server, and it has some upstream applications that run on that server that are part of our Identity Management service, and our Identity Management service is provided as a subservice to our Workday and Salesforce.com customer-facing services. All right, so it's one of the things that can happen with this is now maybe I'll go and say let's check conflicts, make sure there's no other changes out there occurring at the same window or time frame, make sure it's within our kind of blackout windows. And the first thing I'll see is it does say there are some conflicts with this. And my main conflict is I actually have a conflict with our Salesforce.com agreed to maintenance schedule. So again, I'm making a change to a technology component that's not directly supporting Salesforce.com, but given the relationship tree and the inherent benefits, this actually causes an impact to our actual Salesforce.com service. And this one is basically got an agreed to maintenance window between Saturdays and 1 to 4. And I'm obviously outside of that window, so it caused a conflict. Now, I could get authorization and proceed with with doing something out of schedule, but if I've got the capability to adjust my schedule, I'd prefer to kind of stay within that window. So I'm just going to change my dates to be from 2 to 4 on Saturday, and if I do check conflicts, we'll see now that my conflicts have been remediated and my change is actually in an allowable window now. Last thing I want to highlight in terms of these relationships is, I'm going to go ahead and just approve this one stage here, is if you'll see on my list of approvers, you'll see a Mara listed as an approver here. And Mara happens to be the service owner of our Salesforce.com service. So the reason we route to her for approval is because there's impact to her service, and she may need to be able to communicate this particular change to her end users, to be aware that there's a change that might impact her service that she's committed to deliver to her end customers. And so let me now kind of just toggle back to where I started. So I kind of started this from the customer's perspective, and these particular changes in this the planned maintenance activities for our server that impacts our services are also communicated back to our consumers through this portal. So as a consumer of these various services, I'm also being made aware that these services I use may be impacted based off of some change. Even though it's done at a component or infrastructure level, there's some upstream impact to me as a consumer of these services. So that concludes what I hope to cover today. I hope this was helpful in highlighting both some features of ServiceNow that can support your asset and config projects, as well as how you deliver a service to your customers that they would expect. And I thank you for the time.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, so if you're interested, there are some possible next steps in which you can engage with us. If you're interested in the advanced self-service catalog and portal with the functionality that Jeff showed today, it's available as a fully functioning self-service demo. It's fun, it's easy to use. You can log in for it on our website. About 700 people have signed up for it to date. And you can get your own login and be using it in a few minutes. And it has all the functionality. You can't get lost. It's very intuitive. So I highly recommend that. If you're, for example, possibly considering a broader service catalog initiative or an asset and configuration initiative, we have a series of one-day workshops, and they really serve to for up to 15 attendees on site, and they serve to educate your team, create a kind of common language and direction, and can save a lot of time months, or, well, definitely months, in consensus building and communications and getting your program going. If you would like, we do have some things we create as IP. If you look here on the lower left-hand side, these are 3 different things, actually. A services definition dictionary that we extended beyond idle, a service taxonomy guide that provides guidance on how to manage a taxonomy and build it, and our services governance guide, which is about governing services effectively throughout their useful life cycle. Those are all available. Just reply via email, and we'll be glad to get in touch with you about it. Last, feel free to look into Evergreen Ready if that's of interest. It is a complete best practice solution on ServiceNow out of the box. So that's the end of my part, and we'll open it up for any questions we have, if we do have any, Stephanie.
Yeah, and we do have some questions. So first of all, Don mentioned a couple offers there, or in general, if you have questions about anything after the event, if you email me at marketing@evergreensys, I will get your question or your request routed, and we'll get those materials to you or get your questions answered. As far as the questions that came in today, Jeff, I've got quite a few for you today. So let's see. Let me start with, are there pre-configured integrations between ServiceNow procurement and other systems?
So as far as I'm aware, ServiceNow has not authored integrations, I guess, between their procurement application and other systems, such as SAP or Oracle. Though, as kind of indicated in my demo today, there are various engagements we've set up where where we have set up those integrations in the past, and we've seen stuff. We've seen SAP, I've seen Oracle e-Business, I've seen PeopleSoft. Though these tend to have some unique aspects for every one of our customers that we've done those integrations. Some that are kind of related to that question there are integrations with tools like BD&A, where BD&A has an integration with, say, the procurement application of ServiceNow, where its role is really to rationalize the models, so that there's a kind of a common set of supporting data that goes around what you're procuring. There are also kind of third-party integration kind of platform as a solution. MuleSoft, SnapLogic, I'm sure there's others I'm not thinking of, that have connectors for both ServiceNow and a variety of other systems, including some of those popular financial management systems.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Jeff, another question says, with the certification task, can data like entitlements be validated? We use the asset module in ServiceNow and are beginning to track entitlements there.
So yes, it's not as common a use case as I've seen other. Typically it's around the CMDB kind of tables, and the attributes of a CI are typically what you see there. But you could point a data certification task, as you saw when I demo. There was an area where you define the filter or the type of data you want to kind of certify. You could point that at the entitlements table, likely the user entitlements table or the department's entitlements table, and create a certification task to validate the data that's registered there to look at those different entitlements. I will say, from a software, if you're talking about like software license entitlements, we tend to see other reports used to kind of track the kind of what are the rights versus what are the entitlements, and is there a discrepancy between what you own versus what's in use or what's promised, as a way to manage that on kind of a either monthly or quarterly kind of basis.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. Jeff, I'm going to start with Don on this question because I feel like he's being left out today. So, Don,
what a shock.
all the questions are going to the smart guy. So I'll give Don this one.
I'm going to the wise guy.
Yeah. In your guys' experience, do people start fresh with a new CMD when they have a new ServiceNow implementation?
Okay. Do they start fresh with a new CMDB when they have a new ServiceNow implementation? That's a really good question. I would say that most do not, but probably many should. Okay. And what I mean by that, the tipping point in that question is it more work to clean up what we have and make sense of it than to start anew? And I think the problem really is that even that premise is, how should that restart be? the restart should come from the top down, focused on a few key things like we talked about, to get traction and to solve the whole problem. And if that's how you looked at it, you could park the old CMDB and say, hey, we're going to start fresh and take it from the top and complete it end to end and really learn from it, right? And then we can bring things over to the CMDB that have value at that point. So the answer, I think, is probably not in many cases, but probably should in a lot.
Great. Jeff, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I would concur. I think it's very tempting on any new implementation to just say, let's suck in all this data that we have readily available in our hands, whether it be hey, let's integrate SECM, or let's load this data from our legacy system into ServiceNow. But obviously, a lot of what Don hit on in his slides today is having data for a purpose and having it for a reason, right? And I think that activity doesn't traditionally happen in a lot of the new implementations of ServiceNow that we've seen in the past.
Right. More data is not necessarily more information.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, another question for you. Would we need any special licenses to use the features you demoed today?
No, I mean, everything I kind of showed today, I think was kind of on purpose, are mostly optional plugins that you can kind of activate on the platform. I will say there are some version-specific kind of elements in there that I showed. So depending if you are a ServiceNow customer, some of the things you may need to upgrade to a certain version to get. Though some of these are fairly old now, like procurement was introduced in Berlin. Data certification, I think, started in Calgary or Dublin, if I recall. And there are the identification and reconciliation I showed. Obviously, was kind of a Geneva screen mainly because there are some improvements with Geneva to that engine.
Great. And one last question. So if anyone else there has any to add, feel free to put them into the chat window. What is the best way to set up the business service relationships between configuration items and their impacted services?
So, I mean, and Don hit on this a little bit in his slides that you could certainly try to manage all these relationships through a manual means and have kind of a service portfolio management process around your services. So as you make author a new service or change a service, that would kind of trigger some activity to define those relationships between the service and other components. Some of those are probably would not be terribly sustainable, especially at the infrastructure level, to get really that complete mapping you would need. So I mean, I would say that in a lot of cases it would lean towards having some sort of auto-discovery tools to support some of the relationship mapping. ServiceNow has some pretty good discovery tools, which include their kind of legacy discovery engine plus their new Service Watch kind of top-down discovery engine. And though, as Don alluded to, some of the service-to-service relationships and service attribute information is probably not something that those tools do a very good job of being able to do automatically, mostly because you have to kind of interrogate those services to see how they're actually using another service. But I'd say kind of in conclusion, a common approach is really to use that auto-discovery for, say, the infrastructure kind of layer as well as the infrastructure to service mapping, and then maybe to manually maintain through change control the service-to-service relationships.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. And if you follow the process correctly, it automatically is going to be correct. It's going to be right, the service-to-service.
I have placed my email into the chat window, so if you have any requests for documentation or follow-up questions or just want to chat with us, you can email me at marketing@evergreensys, and that is in the chat window right now. So I'd like to thank you all for attending. Please note that some of the follow-up emails from this event may also come from the ReadyTalk email address. So if you have not already added that to your trusted sender list, you may need to check your junk or spam filters. And I appreciate your patience as we work through the new system. We look forward to having you on future events. We've got 2 more coming up, I think on the 16th and the 30th off the top of my head, but check our resources tab. Evergreensys.com, go to resources, and I'll have those 2 events listed by the close of business today, and you can get registered for those. So thank you again for attending, and we'll see you soon. Bye.